Free agency officially opens up on Sunday evening, June 30th, and rumors are already starting to take off. Everybody is patiently waiting around their phones to notify them of an Adrian Wojnarowski tweet announcing a big signing or a trade that's going down, and the excitement is building up by the day. Some teams have lofty aspirations for this free agency period, and others have more modest expectations, which brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be running through every single NBA team and going over the one thing that each of them need to achieve the most during this free agency period. Before we start though, make sure to subscribe to the channel as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Just to make things easy on myself, for the order, I'll be going in alphabetical order, so we'll start in Atlanta with the Hawks. The Hawks have done a phenomenal job putting together a group of young players that seemingly all fit really well alongside each other during their rebuild, and now they've got to play the waiting game for them all to develop for a few years. With that being said, in free agency this summer, the team's number one focus should be adding one or two veterans to the team who have a ton of big game experience and can shed some light onto the young guys. Perhaps bringing in Vince Carter back for his last year could be the move, but if not, there are plenty others that they could target. Next up is the Boston Celtics, who haven't exactly had the best summer so far. It's become pretty clear that both Kyrie Irving and Al Horford are on their way out of town, and Terry Rozier might join that list. Because of this, their biggest need is to add a big name, either guard or center. Kemba Walker and Nikola Vucevic are the two names that come to mind immediately here, and if the team can land one of them, then they should be able to stay afloat despite losing their two best players. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, who are in one of the worst situations in the whole league, and my one need for them is actually to stop spending. First, let Kemba Walker leave in free agency, then either look for trade partners to take on some of their terrible contracts, or just wait it out until they expire. This team desperately needs an actual rebuild because they have possibly the lowest ceiling in the league regarding their future at the moment. Next up is the Chicago Bulls, who also have a nice collection of young talent that are set to grow together over the years and hopefully become something special. As long as that core stays healthy this year, they're also not far off from a playoff appearance, and because of that, they need to target someone, preferably a guard or wing, that is ready to produce now on both ends of the floor and can help stabilize this young team. Patrick Beverley and Malcolm Brogdon are two names to keep an eye on here, and either one would be a terrific add for them. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, who will probably be near the bottom of the standings again this year as they continue to rebuild in the post-LeBron era. With that said though, the one thing they need this summer is a big man. They have way too big of a surplus of guards on the roster and way too few big men, so they simply need to balance that out. Next up is the Dallas Mavericks, and their one goal this summer should be to extend Kristaps Porzingis long term. They went out and traded him this season while he was still injured with the hopes of pairing him with Luka Doncic moving forward, so in order to keep that dream alive, it would be more than ideal to get that contract situation out of the way early on so he can focus on getting back onto the court and do what he does best. Next up is the Denver Nuggets, who made great progress last season with their core of guys by getting the 2 seed in the playoffs and making the conference semifinals. In order to keep that going and to build off of what they've got, they need to find a way to extend Paul Millsap for a few more years on a less expensive contract. They could choose to exercise the $30 million team option for this year, but it would be much better for them to agree on a smaller price tag with more years guaranteed. Up next is the Detroit Pistons, who desperately need to surround Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond with some talent. Specifically, the one thing they need to do in free agency this summer is add a player or two capable of creating their own offense and scoring at a decent rate either on the wing or as a guard. Their guard play this season was very subpar, and if they want to be taken seriously in the playoffs, they need to make this kind of move. Next up is the Golden State Warriors, who, as we all know, have reigned over the league for the last few years. For them, they shouldn't want their dynasty to end quite yet, and while it might be tough to convince Kevin Durant to stay, the one thing they absolutely need to make sure they do this summer is re-sign Klay Thompson. Yes, Klay's injury will probably keep him out most of next season, but the plan should still be to keep him and Steph together as long as possible. Up next is the Houston Rockets, who are desperate to upgrade. They want a championship while James Harden is still at the top of his game, and adding a third star is the path to doing so. Unfortunately, they have essentially no cap space, so in order to do this, they need to convince Jimmy Butler to talk the Sixers into signing and trading him. It will not be easy at all, but if they want a legit shot at a title while the league is still fairly wide open, then they have to get it done. Up next is the Indiana Pacers, who have been one of the most slept-on teams in the Eastern Conference. With Victor Oladipo back healthy next season, they will want to take a step forward and compete with the top of the conference, and their biggest position of need is at point guard. It's been rumored that they're eyeing up D'Angelo Russell, but even a guy like Ricky Rubio would help improve the team. Next up is the Los Angeles Clippers, who are another team that will be looking to make a massive splash this summer. They have a ton of money to spend, and in order to capitalize on it, they need to lure a big-name star. Whether it's Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, or someone else, this is the time for them to capitalize on their cap space along with their talented foundation. Up next is the Los Angeles Lakers, who currently have all eyes on them. They already have LeBron James, they traded for Anthony Davis, and they now have a third max slot open. The one thing they need to do is get that third big name to form a big three if they're serious about getting LeBron another ring. There's a ton of max contract talent on the market, and all they need is one guy. Then the bench can be filled out with veterans taking the minimum that are interested in playing for a contender. Next up is the Memphis Grizzlies, who are starting to officially rebuild, having traded away Mike Conley. They have a good group of young talent with Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson, and Brandon Clark, but they need some shooting from the wings. They won't be in the mix for the biggest names on the market, but guys like Seth Curry, Reggie Bullock, Rodney Hood, or Troy Daniels could be good adds. Next up is the Miami Heat, who are currently, no offense, in cap hell. They probably won't take much part in free agency this year, so instead they should really try to find a trade partner for some of their bad contracts. It may not affect them much for next year, but moving some of those bad deals could help them out down the line. Next up is the Milwaukee Bucks, who must continue to build around their MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo. They don't have the money to try to add another star to the team, but what they should focus on doing instead is re-signing both Chris Middleton and Malcolm Brogdon. Those two are critical pieces of their core, and keeping them would be huge for a bounce-back season this year after having won 60 games last year. Next up is the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are kind of stuck. They have very little money to spend because they gave a max contract to Andrew Wiggins, and the team they currently have isn't even very good. Their biggest positional need is at point guard, and while it wouldn't drastically alter their trajectory, adding someone like Darren Collison could at least balance out the lineup. Next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, who have a rock-solid group of young talent headlined by Zion Williamson, and honestly, they're in no rush at the moment. They don't particularly have any big needs, so for this video, I'll say that perhaps they should add some veterans to that locker room to mentor the young guys. Up next is the New York Knicks, who are hoping to turn their fortune around this summer. Whether or not they sign a big name is yet to be seen, but for me, the one thing they must do is stay far away from DeMarcus Cousins. He's too much of a question mark, and signing him would be such a Knicks move trying to hit a home run with someone that just won't be a home run. Just don't do it. Up next is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are another team with virtually no cap space to spend. They do, however, have a taxpayer mid-level worth $5.7 million at their disposal, and there have been reports, however, that they may not use it, which I believe would be foolish, and for me, the one thing this team needs to do is actually use that contract to bring in someone who can contribute in the rotation, because they don't have many other options if they want to improve. Up next is the Orlando Magic, who, after years of disappointment, finally made a return to the playoffs this year. If they want that success to continue, quite simply they must re-sign Nikola Vucevic. He's been there from the start and deserves to get paid and continue to be the focal point of this squad. Next up is the Philadelphia 76ers, who were on the verge of knocking off the eventual champions before Kawhi Leonard hit the most miraculous shot of all time. For them, their task is simple: re-sign Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris and run it back. Up next is the Phoenix Suns, who have been rebuilding for years now and have no progress to show for it. They have made some decent trades already and added a few good pieces, but the position they're still lacking most is at point guard. They won't be bidders for the biggest name point guards, but a middle tier guy capable of playing the position would be a good start. Next is the Portland Trailblazers, who had their best playoff run yet under the leadership of Damian Lillard and are hoping to continue to build on that. Unfortunately, they don't have big money to spend and are likely losing some key rotation players, so for me, the one thing they need to do is find a 3-and-D wing player that can help replace lost talent and balance out the lineup. Next up is the Sacramento Kings, who were one of the most fun teams to watch last season and narrowly missed out on a playoff spot. They have a lot of money to spend this summer, and if they want to make that jump into the playoffs this year, the one thing they must be aggressive in is landing at least one or two of the second tier guys like Bojan Bogdanovic, Malcolm Brogdon, or anyone else around that talent level. Next up is the San Antonio Spurs. There's a possibility that they could lose Rudy Gay to free agency this summer, so their top priority has to be to either re-sign him or find a replacement on the wing ready to compete like Trevor Ariza. Their run of dominance may be over, but that doesn't mean that Coach Pop is quite ready to fold out of the playoff hunt quite yet. Up next is the NBA champion Toronto Raptors, and their one goal is obvious: re-sign Kawhi Leonard. They must do whatever they have to do to get him back, because if he leaves, their run of dominance would end pretty quickly. Up next is the Utah Jazz, who have already had a good summer by trading for Mike Conley. Because of this, their one goal should be to find a power forward that can stretch the floor, giving their creators more room to operate. Tobias Harris would be a great fit, but because he's going to be so difficult to obtain, they could also target Nikola Mirotic. Finally, the last team is the Washington Wizards, and their biggest goal for free agency has to be to get a capable point guard to fill in for John Wall while he recovers from his injury, either most or all of the year. The team doesn't want to trade Bradley Beal, so their goal will still be to get to the playoffs, and if that's what they want, then they need someone to replace their all-star and leader in the lineup. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more NBA content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.